Hello, everyone. You're watching a channel where we don't chase headlines. We break down the logic behind them. Let me start with a question that changes how you read the world. What is more dangerous? A loud crisis that everyone sees, or a quiet decision made in an office that silently rewrites the rules? People react to explosions, speeches, and dramatic images. But the long-term price of history is often set somewhere else. In budgets, procurement choices, alliance priorities, and technical decisions that determine where a state spends strength and where it saves strength. That is the lens of today's video. Here is a simple way to use this in real time. When a new event breaks, start with 3 calmer questions. 1. What is the decision the United States must make now? 2. What resource does that decision consume? Money, weapons, diplomatic capital, or political attention? 3. If the United States spends that resource here, where does it save it somewhere else? That last part is where quiet decisions become visible. A single signature on a national strategy, a change in procurement priorities, or a new rule for technology exports can redirect the whole security system without a single dramatic scene on television. You can stress test the approach with real or modeled situations. If Russia rejects a settlement and expands aggression, Washington will ask, is this a direct test of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's eastern flank, a contest in the Black Sea region, or pressure on the Caucasus and Central Asia through proxies and leverage? The closer it is to treaty commitments, the more the United States prioritizes deterrence and reinforcement. The further it is, the more Washington uses partners, rules, and indirect tools. If Iran pushes uranium enrichment further, Washington's first concern is escalation control, preventing a regional chain reaction that pulls the United States into a direct war. The quiet decisions here tend to be about positioning forces, tightening financial pressure, and coordinating with partners on red lines, while keeping room for diplomacy. If Turkey and Israel collide in Syria, the United States faces an uncomfortable problem. 2 partners with clashing security logics. Washington's behavior in such a case is often conflict management rather than a clean solution. Deconfliction channels, limited pressure, and selective engagement, because a full solution consumes political capital the system may prefer to spend elsewhere. Keep these examples in mind as we go through the 3 country maps. I will show you a practical way to think about risk in 2026 as a decision tool. I call it a risk map. It has 3 parts: scenario corridors, chains of consequences, and early warning indicators. Scenario corridors answer: which direction is the system drifting? Chains of consequences answer: if pressure increases in one place, where does it spread next? Early warning indicators answer: what should you watch weekly, so you see the shift before it becomes a headline? I will apply this to 3 countries that look very different: Ukraine, Germany, and Kazakhstan. The goal is to understand what they mean for the United States and how Washington is likely to behave when several crises compete for attention. Because that is the real challenge of 2026. The United States has power, but it has limited bandwidth. It chooses, and those choices shape the world. Ukraine, the test of endurance. For the United States, Ukraine is not only one battlefield. It is a test of credibility, deterrence, and the ability to sustain pressure over time. In 2026, the risk is often drift, the slow thinning of resilience. Front lines can hold, while the system becomes more fragile. Energy, repairs, logistics, budget, people, and the rhythm of external support. So what are the scenario corridors? Corridor 1 is managed resilience. Support remains predictable, repairs keep pace with damage, and governance stays functional. Corridor 2 is drift into vulnerability. Aid arrives in irregular waves, budgets run on improvisation, and fatigue grows. The situation looks stable until one additional shock forces an expensive scramble. Corridor 3 is a pressure spike, a coordinated attempt to change tempo through energy nodes, logistics routes, and high-impact strikes to split partners and create urgency. Now the chain of consequences. Energy stress raises the cost of life and pushes governments into emergency spending. Emergency spending creates budget gaps. Budget gaps delay repairs and procurement. Delays reduce resilience. Then the next wave hits harder. A technical shock turns into a political problem. Another chain starts with irregular external support. When rhythm breaks, planning breaks. When planning breaks, procurement becomes reactive and more expensive. Disputes grow. Public trust falls. Mobilization weakens. Drift accelerates. So what does this mean for Washington? Washington will care less about drama and more about tempo. It will prioritize systems that stabilize resilience, air defense, energy resilience, repair capacity, logistics, and training pipelines. It will also treat predictability as a strategic asset because predictability prevents drift. Early warning indicators you can watch even from open sources are simple. Watch the rhythm of approved funding and deliveries, the speed of power restoration after strikes, and the level of internal political conflict around wartime decisions. Germany, the speed of Europe. Germany matters to the United States because Germany is a decision engine for Europe. When Germany moves, Europe coordinates. When Germany hesitates, Europe fragments. Fragmentation is expensive. It slows support and invites pressure. In 2026, Germany's risks often appear as slow decision cycles, coalition friction, and social fatigue. Corridor 1 is managed adjustment. Germany invests in defense and industrial capacity and keeps domestic politics workable. Corridor 2 is caution and slowdown. Compromises become harder, budgets become battlegrounds, and decisions take longer. Germany stays stable, but Europe's tempo declines. Corridor 3 is internal turbulence. Price waves, migration tensions, and polarization drive a more volatile environment. External commitments get filtered through internal stability. The chain of consequences here starts with prices. Price waves raise social temperature. Higher social temperature strengthens protest, moods, and political extremes. That makes coalition governance harder. Harder governance slows budgets and strategic decisions. Slower decisions weaken Europe's ability to coordinate. That is how a domestic cost of living issue becomes a strategic vulnerability. For Washington, the implication is clear. It will push Europe to carry more of the burden while watching Germany's domestic constraints. Washington will also focus on industrial production and replenishment because in 2026 the story is about capacity and tempo. Early warning indicators. Watch real procurement decisions, signals from key industries, and the intensity of coalition conflict. Kazakhstan, the rule-based squeeze. Now let's go to a country many Americans rarely think about day to day. Kazakhstan. Why should the United States care? Because Kazakhstan sits at the intersection of sanctions pressure, trade corridors, energy and critical resources, and the long competition between Russia and China. For Kazakhstan, risk often arrives through rules, financial compliance, export controls, transit restrictions, and the changing behavior of banks and insurers. In 2026, the painful scenario is a compliance squeeze that turns time into cost. Corridor 1 is balanced diversification. Kazakhstan keeps multiple partners and preserves manageability. Corridor 2 is rising external pressure. Major powers push harder for alignment. The price of maneuver rises. Corridor 3 is a payments and transit shock. Banks become cautious, transactions slow, documentation demands rise, and logistics costs increase. Corridor 4 is internal turbulence triggered by economic stress. Currency volatility and price pressure raise social sensitivity. The chain of consequences is straightforward. Compliance tightening slows payments. Payment delays create cash strain. Cash strain weakens supply chains. Weak supply chains raise prices. Higher prices raise frustration. Then regulation becomes sudden. Predictability falls. Investment slows. A technical rule spreads into political and economic stress. For Washington, Kazakhstan is a place where policy works indirectly. The United States shapes behavior through rules and enforcement priorities. Washington will want tighter compliance, while avoiding a situation where Kazakhstan gets forced into dependence on one dominant partner. Early warning indicators. Watch bank behavior and payment delays, transit friction, and currency and inflation expectations. Putting the three cases together, Ukraine, Germany, and Kazakhstan are different stories, but they show one pattern. In 2026, the United States will manage several fronts through prioritization. It will protect credibility in Europe, push partners to carry more weight, and rely on rules and financial leverage to shape behavior in sensitive regions. And the decisive moves will often be quiet. A procurement decision that stabilizes air defense, a budget choice that speeds up production, a compliance rule that changes trade flows, a diplomatic trade-off that shifts attention. That is why a risk map matters. It trains you to watch the quiet inputs that produce loud outcomes. A loud crisis captures attention. A quiet decision captures the future. If you want to understand where the world is going, watch where leaders place their resources and where they decide to economize. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want more risk maps and calm, practical analysis of global events.